Howard Stern looked directly into Meghan Markle's eyes and said the words no former royal ever wants to hear on live television. Meghan's reaction proved that even former royalty has a breaking point, and all of America watched it happen live. The morning sun streamed through the windows of the View studio as the production crew made their final adjustments. Today wasn't just another episode of daytime television. Today, Howard Stern was guest hosting, and Meghan Markle was scheduled to appear as the main guest to promote her latest book. The combination had everyone on edge, from the producers to the audience members filing into their seats. Meghan arrived at the studio in a perfectly tailored cream blazer and matching trousers, her hair swept back in an elegant low bun. She carried herself with the poise that had been drilled into her during her brief time as a working royal, but there was something different in her demeanor today. Perhaps it was the way she kept glancing at her phone, or how her smile seemed just a fraction too bright, too practiced. The show's regular hosts, Whoopi Goldberg, Joy Behar, Sarah Haynes, and Alyssa Farah Griffin, had taken their usual seats around the iconic table. But where Sunny Hostin normally sat, Howard Stern lounged back in his chair with that infamous smirk that had made him both beloved and reviled across America for decades. His wild gray hair caught the studio lights, and his piercing eyes scanned the room like a predator assessing its territory. "Ladies and gentlemen," Whoopi announced with her characteristic warmth, though anyone paying attention could detect the slight tension in her voice, "we have a very special guest host with us today. Please welcome the one and only Howard Stern." The audience erupted in applause, though it was the kind of nervous energy that comes when people aren't quite sure what they're about to witness. Howard stood briefly, waved to the crowd with exaggerated enthusiasm, then settled back into his chair like a king claiming his throne. "And joining us now," Joy Behar continued, her voice carrying just a hint of wariness, "is someone who needs no introduction. Former actress, former royal, and current best-selling author, Meghan Markle." Meghan emerged from backstage, her professional smile firmly in place. She waved to the audience with practiced precision, each gesture calculated to project confidence and warmth. But as she made her way to the guest chair, her eyes briefly met Howard's, and something flickered across her face. It was gone in an instant, replaced by that camera-ready composure, but Howard caught it. He always caught everything. "Meghan, wonderful to have you here," Whoopi said as Meghan settled into her seat, smoothing her blazer and crossing her legs at the ankles in that distinctly royal manner she'd never quite shaken. "Thank you so much for having me," Meghan replied, her voice carrying that careful blend of American casualness and British refinement that had become her trademark. "It's always a pleasure to be here with such accomplished women." Her eyes deliberately avoided Howard as she spoke, focusing instead on the familiar faces of the regular hosts. But Howard wasn't someone who could be ignored for long. "So Meghan," Howard began, his voice carrying that distinctive rasp that had captivated radio audiences for decades, "before we talk about your book, I have to ask about something that's been bothering me." The studio seemed to hold its breath. Even the cameras seemed to zoom in a little closer, sensing that something significant was about to unfold. Meghan's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course, Howard. What's on your mind?" Howard leaned forward slightly, his elbows resting on the table, his fingers steepled in front of him. It was a pose he'd perfected over decades of interviews, the physical embodiment of casual intensity. "You know, I've been in this business for a long time," he said, his tone conversational but with an underlying edge that made everyone in the studio lean forward. "I've interviewed thousands of people. Presidents, pop stars, porn stars, you name it. And one thing I've learned is that people reveal themselves in the smallest details." Meghan nodded politely, though her knuckles had gone slightly white where they gripped the arms of her chair. "That's very perceptive of you. Here's what I don't understand," Howard continued, his voice growing more pointed with each word. "You married into the most famous family in the world, gained a title that billions of people dream about, and then you walked away from it all. But here's the kicker, you won't stop talking about it." The audience murmured softly, sensing the shift in atmosphere. Whoopi shifted uncomfortably in her seat, while Joy raised her eyebrows in that way that meant she was preparing for damage control. Meghan's smile remained frozen in place, but her voice carried a slight tremor as she responded. "I think it's important to share authentic experiences, Howard. People deserve to know the truth about." "The truth?" Howard interrupted, his voice rising just enough to command complete attention. "Here's what I think the truth is, Meghan. I think you saw an opportunity to become the most famous woman in the world, and when it didn't work out exactly the way you planned, you decided to burn it all down and cash in on the ashes." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the production crew, usually bustling with quiet activity, had frozen in place. Cameras captured every micro-expression on Meghan's face as the words hit their target. Her composure cracked for just a moment, revealing something raw and angry underneath. "That's not," she began, but Howard wasn't finished. "See, here's the thing about victims," he continued, his voice taking on that hypnotic quality that had made him a master of his craft. Real victims don't usually get multi-million-dollar Netflix deals out of their trauma. Real victims don't write tell-all books and go on international speaking tours about their suffering. Real victims suffer in silence, Meghan. They don't turn their pain into a brand. Meghan's face had gone pale beneath her carefully applied makeup. Her breathing became shallow, and her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the chair arms tighter. "Howard," Whoopi interjected, sensing danger, "maybe we should." "No, let me finish," Howard said, holding up a hand without taking his eyes off Meghan. "Because I'm not done with the truth yet." He leaned back in his chair, studying Meghan like a scientist examining a particularly interesting specimen. "You want to know what I really think happened? I think you went into that family expecting to change centuries of tradition to accommodate you. And when they said no, when they expected you to actually serve instead of being served, you couldn't handle it." Meghan's voice, when she finally found it, was barely above a whisper. "You don't know what you're talking about, don't I?" Howard's voice was relentless now, each word precisely chosen for maximum impact. "You married Harry, and suddenly you thought you could modernize the monarchy. You thought you could turn a 1,000-year-old institution into your personal platform for social justice warrior nonsense. And when they politely told you to slow your roll, you cried racism and ran back to Hollywood." The audience was completely silent now, some covering their mouths in shock, others staring in fascination at the car crash unfolding before them. The other hosts exchanged worried glances, but none dared interrupt. Meghan's composure was unraveling in real time. Her breathing became more labored, and tears began to form in the corners of her eyes. That's not how it happened." "Then how did it happen, Meghan?" Howard pressed, his voice softening just enough to seem almost gentle, which somehow made it more devastating. "Because from where I sit, it looks like you used that family to elevate your status, and when they expected you to actually do the work that comes with that status, you bailed. And now you're making millions playing the victim." A single tear rolled down Meghan's cheek, cutting a path through her foundation. Her voice cracked as she spoke. "You have no idea what it was like. The pressure, the isolation, the way they treated me. The way they treated you." Howard's voice rose again, but this time there was genuine incredulity in it. "They gave you a title, a palace, a platform to champion any cause you wanted, and millions of dollars worth of jewelry and clothing. They bent over backwards to welcome an American divorcee into their family, and you repaid them by airing their dirty laundry on international television." Meghan was crying openly now, though she was trying desperately to maintain some semblance of composure. Her voice was thick with tears as she attempted to defend herself. "They never protected me. They threw me to the wolves and—" "Protected you from what?" Howard interrupted again, his voice cutting through her words like a knife. "From having to actually work, from having to follow protocol, from having to put something other than yourself first for once in your life." The cameras captured every moment of Meghan's breakdown. Mascara began to streak down her cheeks as she struggled to find words that wouldn't come. The other hosts sat in stunned silence, unsure whether to intervene or let the moment play out. Howard, sensing that he had pushed her to the breaking point, delivered what would become the most quoted line of the entire exchange. "Here's the real truth, Meghan," he said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, which somehow made it more powerful than any shout. "You're not a victim. You're a user. You used the royal family to gain fame and relevance, and when it became too much work, you used victimhood to maintain that fame. And the saddest part is, you've convinced yourself that you're some kind of hero in this story." Something inside Meghan snapped. She shot to her feet so quickly that her chair rocked backward, her face a mixture of rage and devastation. "How dare you?" she choked out through her tears. "How dare you sit there and judge me when you know nothing about what I've been through?" Howard remained seated, looking up at her with an expression of almost clinical interest. "I know enough," he said simply. Meghan's voice rose to nearly a shout, her careful composure completely abandoned now. "You think this is easy? You think I wanted any of this? I never asked to be torn apart by the media every single day." "No," Howard replied, his voice maddeningly calm in contrast to her emotional outburst. "You just profited from it. That was the final straw." Meghan's face contorted with fury and humiliation as she grabbed her purse from the floor beside her chair. "I don't have to listen to this," she said, her voice breaking on every word. "I don't have to sit here and be attacked by someone who makes a living exploiting people's pain." Howard raised an eyebrow. "Exploiting people's pain? That's rich, coming from you." Meghan turned to face him one last time, tears streaming down her face, her voice raw with emotion. "You're a monster," she whispered. "You're a heartless monster who gets off on destroying people." "Maybe," Howard said with a slight shrug, "but at least I'm honest about it." With a sound that was half sob, half scream, Meghan turned and ran toward the exit. Her heels clicked frantically against the studio floor as she fled, one hand covering her face, the other still clutching her purse. The cameras followed her until she disappeared through the stage door, leaving behind a silence so complete it felt like the entire world had stopped breathing. For several long moments, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The audience sat in shocked silence, unsure whether they had just witnessed great television or something that should never have been broadcast. Finally, Howard broke the silence. He turned to face the camera with that infamous smirk, as if nothing extraordinary had just happened. "Well," he said, his voice carrying its usual sardonic tone, "I guess we know where her breaking point is." Whoopi found her voice first, though it came out as barely a croak. "Howard, I think—" "Look, no, I'm supposed to apologize now," Howard continued, addressing the camera directly. "I'm supposed to say I went too far, that I feel bad about making her cry. But here's the thing. Sometimes the truth hurts. And sometimes people need to hear it, even if it makes them uncomfortable." Joy Behar, ever the professional, attempted to salvage the situation. "Well, that was certainly intense. Maybe we should take a quick break and—" "No breaks," Howard said, waving his hand dismissively. "Let's talk about what just happened here. Because what you just witnessed, America, was what happens when someone who's built their entire identity on being a victim gets confronted with the possibility that they might actually be the villain in their own story." The audience remained silent, still processing what they had witnessed. Some looked uncomfortable, others fascinated. A few were actually nodding in agreement with Howard's assessment. "See, Meghan wants you to believe that she's the innocent victim in all this," Howard continued, his voice taking on the hypnotic cadence that had made him famous. "The poor little actress who married a prince and got eaten alive by the big bad royal family. But here's what she doesn't want you to think about. She knew exactly what she was getting into when she married Harry." Sarah Haynes finally found her voice. "Howard, don't you think that was a little harsh? She was clearly emotional." "Of course she was emotional," Howard interrupted. "Manipulation is emotional. Playing the victim is emotional. But being emotional doesn't make you right, and it doesn't make your actions justified." He turned back to the camera, his expression serious now. "You want to know what I think really happened in that family? I think they tried to help her. I think they tried to teach her the ropes, tried to show her how to be effective within their system. But Meghan didn't want to learn their system. She wanted to change it. And when they said no, she decided to blow it all up." The camera captured every nuance of his expression as he spoke, the intensity in his eyes, the conviction in his voice. This was Howard Stern at his most dangerous. Not when he was being crude or shocking, but when he was being brutally honest. "And now she's crying because someone finally called her out on it," he continued. "She's crying because for the first time in years, someone refused to participate in her victim narrative. Someone refused to feel sorry for her." Alyssa Farah Griffin, who had remained silent throughout the entire exchange, finally spoke up. "But Howard, even if you disagree with her choices, don't you think there's a way to express that without—" "Without what?" Howard cut her off. "Without making her face the consequences of her actions? Without forcing her to confront the reality of what she's done? Sorry, but I'm not in the business of protecting people from uncomfortable truths." The production team was frantically signaling from the sides of the stage, clearly wanting to cut to commercial. But Howard was on a roll and showed no signs of stopping. "You know what the real tragedy is here?" he asked, his voice taking on an almost philosophical tone. "Harry, that poor bastard gave up everything. His family, his military career, his entire identity, for someone who was never going to be satisfied with what he had to offer. He thought he was saving her, but she was always going to find something to be upset about." The audience was completely captivated now, hanging on his every word. Even the other hosts had given up trying to redirect the conversation, recognizing that they were witnessing something unprecedented. "And the worst part is, she's convinced him that he's the hero in this story too," Howard continued. "She's got him believing that walking away from his family was some kind of noble act, when really it was just the ultimate expression of her narcissism." He paused, looking directly into the camera with those piercing eyes. "You want to know how I know I'm right about all this? Because she just proved it. Instead of staying here and defending herself, instead of trying to have an actual conversation about these issues, she ran away. Just like she ran away from the royal family when things got tough." The silence that followed was broken by the sound of someone in the audience starting to clap. Then another person joined in, and another, until roughly half the studio was applauding. The other half sat in stunned silence or obvious disapproval. Whoopi, recognizing that the show had completely gone off the rails, finally managed to regain control. "Well, I think we can all agree that this has been an unprecedented morning here on The View." Howard turned to her with that trademark grin. "Come on, Whoopi, admit it. This is the most honest conversation about Meghan Markle that's ever happened on television." "Honest or cruel?" Joy asked, her voice carrying a note of challenge. "Sometimes there's no difference," Howard replied without missing a beat. "Sometimes honesty is cruel, but that doesn't make it less necessary." As the show finally cut to commercial, the audience continued to buzz with conversation. Social media was already exploding with clips of the confrontation, hashtags trending worldwide within minutes. Some praised Howard for saying what everyone was thinking, others condemned him for his brutality. But one thing was certain: nobody would forget what they had just witnessed. The moment when America's most notorious shock jock stripped away years of carefully crafted narrative and forced a former royal to face some uncomfortable truths about herself. Whether you agreed with his methods or not, Howard Stern had done what he did best. He had started a conversation that nobody wanted to have but everybody needed to hear. And somewhere in the building, Meghan Markle was probably still crying, wondering how a simple book promotion had turned into the most humiliating moment of her post-royal life. The truth, as Howard had said, sometimes hurts. But it was out there now, for everyone to see and judge for themselves.